Hello and welcome to my bushfire resistant tiny house video. This is a long explanation of how I've constructed it. And first and foremost I have to say this is not a bunker on wheels. This house carries a lock up and leave policy with it. I'm going to be taking you through fireproofing methods, my construction methods, insulation, sustainability. Before I do all that, thanks to Daniel Fabry for doing the footage. Thanks to Pat Tucker, he did my promo. Thanks to my mate Rach who chucked up a bunch of cash so that I could build this house before I sell it. It is for sale. Keep an eye out for a sales pitch. I'm not much of a salesman, so you'll have to look pretty hard. This is me trying to avoid a photo shoot. And before I get started to the house, I'll just explain what it is that I do. I'm primarily a carpenter, but I design my own work and have been doing so for a long time. I've built several tiny houses now. This is my first fireproof house from a year ago. Thanks Kelly for modelling it. Thanks Damo for modelling this one as well. It was quite a success. A lot of people liked what I came up with, and it was a great endorsement. It was actually sold to a local CFA member, to firefighter up here in Kinglake. Some of my other work. Grass roof pergolas, a water wheel. My former life as a playground artist, I built pirate ship playgrounds primarily. And I built a lot of really long lasting constructions, really heavy duty constructions. This ship here, built entirely out of ironbark. And this one here, fixed to the frame of a tree. It's quite a step for me to make weight limited houses. But a challenge which I enjoyed nonetheless. My first tiny house there. All tiny houses should have slides. And I've dabbled in a few other things like water gardens, furniture. I have my own style which I call farm punk, which you will see on all my tiny houses. Also dabbled in a few things like instruments and carvings as well. Also mill my own timber. Which is important to me for sustainability reasons, and it allows me to keep the prices down as well. So this house I'm selling only for $20,000 on the starting bid. Some of my experience in fire, I've been working away on this for a while, trying to master the art. Back to this house, how have I fireproofed it? I've got an enormous number of fireproof materials, about 40 different measures. And they were invented by the CSIRO for the purposes of fireproof houses. I've borrowed the Bushfire attack level 29 regs and then adjusted them to fit on a trailer. A couple of the materials I've used, obviously tin and steel. This is the fireproof cladding. It's actually a sheet cladding, 1.2 by 2.7 meters, profiled cladding covered in fireproof paint. The aesthetic of either the red or the blue that you see here is acrylic paint. It's ready to be painted over if you don't like it. And it's not the colour of the paint. That grey there is the original colour of the paint. It needs 2 or 3 coats. Here I've got an array of 10 fireproof timbers which are rated for BAL 29. A lot of small measures like tie downs and silicone which is required to make it seal well and be incredibly strong as well. Shutters are a big part of this. Windows are a weak point. This is me in fast forward, closing all 4 shutters on a door and 3 windows. They shut very easily. I can do this all with one hand from the ground in about half a minute if I need to. This could be done to keep out all sorts of radiant heat, whether it's sun or fire. Also used to keep out neighbours and for driving as well, to stop any stones from hitting them. I'll get to the glass later down the track. This is her all sealed up, ready to survive a fire. One of the problems I have, wheels don't get a mention in the fire regs, not surprisingly. This is me removing them. Roll the house down and then I cover the wheel wells with steel sheet as well. Doesn't take me long, it's about half an hour to an hour to set this up depending on the land that I'm on. Jacks have since been replaced with something a little bit sturdier, but those scissor jacks worked quite well while I had them. The underside is all covered with steel, sealed in with silicone, fireproof silicone. The cabling underneath is wrapped in copper. And all the wires, as much as possible, have been removed and put inside the house. Here you can see them being funneled up inside a steel column. One problem I have is the breakaway system, how all trailers require it. Their batteries, they burn in fires, so I've put them inside the house in relative safety. This is me covering up some of the headlamps. Another problem I have, which aren't on the regulations. I can't stop them from melting inside the fire, but I can stop them from igniting and causing a huge problem. The smaller lights are sealed behind with silicone, and the fireproof paint is incredibly difficult to ignite, so they're not going to cause a problem. Fireproof silicone underneath the gutter, this is where the gutter goes, so underneath the tin, and also underneath the ridge capping. Here we have some of the steel covering joins. It's fixed very well. All kinds of steel does weird things in fire. Here you can see the screws in the cladding, which is pinning it down. Again, things do weird stuff under heat, so we need to pin them very tightly. Decks are a problem, so I'm using heavy duty fireproof timber here, ironbark and silver top ash, approved for BAL 29 use. I have rounded the corners off. It's thick timber, it's 30mm thick. I've covered the edges in steel, and this is also acting as a ballast for the towing of the house as well, particularly because I'm towing it empty. This piece of timber has been lightly toasted. It's not Shoshugi barn, it's just an aesthetic choice. It's incredibly dense timber. This is how dense it is. You can do this experiment at home. A lot of the BAL 29 timbers will do that. The door itself has about 6 different measures to make it fireproof. Here it is in construction. It's red ironbark and silver top ash. Steel behind the steel, there's pine core as well. I've also got steel on the edges and incredibly well fixed. Fireproof silicone there as well. And on the bottom, which is quite vulnerable to fire, I've got an ironbark sill and a really tight gap. All the gaps are very well sealed on both the door and the window. They're double door stopped. They make this sound when you close them. And here I've got a fireproof door handle. That is, it has no plastic in it, so it can't melt and jam up. It's a very good quality handle, and you can see the fireproof stoppers there as well. The window is built in a similar vein, and here you can see it closing very tightly with a second stopper on the outside. All the glass is toughened glass. That's toughened, double glazed and argon filled to keep out as much heat as possible and to not crack under the radiant heat. The gutter guard is pretty important. It won't clean the gutter for you, but will allow the gutters to be cleaned very easily. It also acts as a filter for your drinking water. The tin also has been fixed every second rib, top, bottom and middle as well. We don't want that to do any twisting during a fire. And some of the other materials on the edge here, this is a flashing, which is often a weak point on a house. I've got extra fixings in it, I've siliconed it down, and the edge of it has got a pinch fold on it as well, which makes it much more rigid along the edge. One of the other measures, the gas bottle on a house is a problem. Here's a gas bottle holder on the front. You don't have to use it. Ideally, you would pipe gas from a distance away. You could remove the gas bottle if you were leaving for a fire. Definitely point the pop-off valve away from the house. That's quite important and a surprisingly effective fireproofing measure. I have in the past used fireproof cabinets. Not saying it's a bad idea, I've just gone for something simpler this time, but there's quite a few methods to save the gas bottle. Speaking of gas, this is what happens during a fire. Obviously the gas ignites and turns into a flamethrower. This is one of 3 tests which I've done for the purposes of this video. It's not to explain the house under house conditions. If you want that test, it's also on my YouTube channel. I ignited up a miniature version of the house, and with quite a lot of success, it defended this exact flame. The flame I'm using is an LPG cylinder. It's 1900 degrees. It's well and truly above, it's around double the heat of a timber fire. It's extremely powerful. I've got it quite close and consistent there. Every 30 seconds I'm just pulling it away so we can just see how that timber is ignited. The stack I'm burning here is cedar and a little bit of radiata pine as well. The timber itself is seasoned. It's got a few rough edges, but not a lot. The corners are square, and otherwise the timber is in pretty good nick. I haven't drilled holes in it or anything like that to try and get it to ignite. I certainly haven't taken it out of an oven before I did this test. You can see the steel crumpling and bending underneath, which is quite alarming. This is to be taken into account with any fireproof construction. The steel might sound like a great idea. It's got its uses. It does also have limits. Sometimes timber is actually better. You can see the spread of flame too, not quite getting to the back corner, but getting pretty close. Now you can see the amount of ridges on the front of that timber. The flame's penetrating quite deeply into the timber. You can also see the gap starting to open up on the end grain. I did this for 3.5 minutes on each stack. This one actually ignited fully and would have kept burning until I put it out with water. Quite interesting to see how the different timbers continued their flame burn. That was the end of this one. The next stack I've got is ironbark and silver top ash. The edges have been rounded off. There's also a couple of pieces of jarrah in there. All those timbers have been rated for a bushfire attack level 29 usage. Doesn't mean that they can't burn. It means that the amount of radiant heat and flame required to get them to burn makes them resistant at that level. You can see here it does obviously ignite, and clearly I'm going to fast forward too. The back corner is getting a bit of flame, but not very much. You can see the timber staying straight, it's not losing pieces. The gaps on the front are much smaller, and also the end grain is not showing those really thick splits which it did on the cedar. The timber stays straight as well, it doesn't warp or twist, not like the steel is doing it below it. This one also just about went out on its own accord. You can see the flame very quickly dissipating without the heat of the torch. That timber just does not burn like you'd expect. Makes fantastic firewood if you ever get your hands on it and you need a wood fire. The next test, fireproof paint. This paint is Fireshell F1E. Happy to give them a plug. They've been pretty cooperative and pretty easy to deal with. I do wholeheartedly believe in their product as well. It does exactly what they claim it does, which is it stops the timber from burning. It puffs up and keeps the heat and the flame away from the core timber. This is radiata pine with just 2 coats of the paint on top of it. You can see the puffing up, you can see a bit of the flame cracking the paint off there and getting to the interior timber. Just a little bit. You can also see the spread of flame is almost negligible. The backside is completely unburnt at the moment. And when I remove that torch on the 30-second intervals, the flame is almost vanishing instantly. So you'll see this one in just a second actually goes out in front of your eyes. Very impressive. Very happy with the way that this one performed. The back here, I've got a bit of unburnt timber on the corners. You can see the way it's puffed up to protect the timber. Ironbark's got a bit of unburnt on it. The cedar, it was pretty much all burnt. You can see the deep furrows in it. You can see bits have dropped off. The timber's warped a little bit as well. And the ironbark and the silvertop's much straighter. It's kept its form, it's kept its corners. Nothing's dropped off it. So a distinct difference there in the way that those two have burnt. This one, obviously the best. It is expensive, but it does absolutely work. So in a second, I'm going to cut those in half and see what's inside it as well. You see the way it's puffed up to protect the timber. You would, of course, need a repaint if your house did go through a fire. You'd also need some repairs on probably some of the plastic items on the house. Here's a piece of the cedar being cut in half. You can see it's whittled down quite a lot. Still solid inside though. The house would not have collapsed under that weight. Ironbark, well and truly stronger there. Only a couple of mil of penetration by the fire. And the fireproof paint, radiator pine inside it was almost completely untouched. So super happy with the way that that's worked out. Another fireproofing measure I've got is the insulation. I've got rock wool insulation in the walls and the outer skin. It's got a double skin. The sizelation also helps to stop the spread of flame. It's incredibly well insulated, far better than any other tiny house you can buy at the moment. That's to keep radiant heat out of the house. It's a small house. It would get hot very quickly if we couldn't defend it from the radiant heat. So the second skin is very important to do that. This is also a very well insulated house, obviously just for living in, which makes it possible to heat it passively. A few well placed windows, and that heat can be soaked up as you desire and trapped within it. This house here actually heated up as I slept in it, a couple of degrees overnight. You can see the garden bed on the inside there growing extremely well because it holds its heat all day and night long. Thanks Damo for doing some rad reading. The windows, as mentioned, double glazed. They're argon filled, which makes them an excellent insulator. Double glazing really required for a tiny house because of the moisture problems on the inside. I've got 3 windows. They're all relatively in a sort of panoramic setup. That makes them easy to defend against summer sun. The eave, which can be swapped onto any 3 of the windows, completely blocks out the summer sun here in Victoria. And with the shutters on the outside, you can completely stop radiant heat from getting to it from the sun on a hot day. The tin on top looks like regular tin. It's not. It's painted with a radiant heat resistant paint, so that it actually reflects radiant heat, which is super handy for a tiny house. They do heat up from the sun very quickly, particularly from the roof. Here's an eave on top of the door, so you can point that north here in the southern hemisphere, and you won't get any northern sun on your window. That eave, as mentioned, can be unscrewed and screwed onto any 3 of the other windows. Between that and the shutters and the heat reflective paint, you can keep this house very, very comfortable during summer, and you absolutely don't need a heater during winter. It just does all that itself. It's quite impressive. The vent on the end has 3 forms of mesh on it to stop embers for a fireproofing measure, and it's also got a radiant heat block. Timber joists, I believe, are an excellent choice for a tiny house. They separate the cold steel from the flooring, which allow you to insulate it. Thermal bridging is a big problem with a steel trailer. The steel trailers I build myself, mostly for sustainability reasons. The commercial trailers have an enormous amount of steel in them, and that's really heavy on carbon. So This is my trailer finished, ready for joists to go on. It's just got 6 main bits of steel and a couple of outriggers. It's a 2.8 tonne chassis, and the house only weighs 1.8, partly thanks to the amount of steel that I've taken out of that trailer and replaced with a very light timber. The timber is structurally sound. It's also supporting some of the edges of the walls. It's very rigid, and it does a great job to making the house towable and lowering the carbon output. This is my frame. Some people tell me it looks very light. It's certainly not. It's incredibly strong. It's incredibly well put together. There are no lintels because on the outside I've got this. This is F27 hardwood beam. It's been used as a fascia board, but it would actually work incredibly well to hold a heavy load if you needed it to. I know that photo had a join in it. It's not above a window. On the front of this house, I've got a lot of strapping to tie it down. The strapping is bracing strap. It's not hoop-iron. It's a much thicker gauge. It goes right down and around the bottom of those steel bearers and up onto the studs there. Here it is in a close-up, and all 4 corners, top and bottom, have a steel strap to hold them together. Got something different at the back, quite a different method, because I built the frame and the trailer together. The timber studs run straight down past the steel joist and are bolted through into the chassis, making it incredibly strong in case of an accident. Also, in case of an accident, the house needs to be braced very well, and this one certainly is. It's got 12 sheets of ply cladding. The ply doubles as the bracing. It's the strongest form of bracing in house construction, and this is opposed to steel strapping, which is the lightest form of bracing in house. So the steel is absolutely trumped by the sheet cladding in this instance. This is me milling timber. These logs were felled after a fire destroyed them, and they made excellent tiny house building timber. Very picky about the actual pieces of timber that I use to build the house so that I can keep it very light and not put any excess timber in. I also use, when I need hardwood, they're recycled rafters. Silvertop ash and ironbark can be found quite easily in recycled timber, and also by reducing the steel, I've reduced the carbon output of the house quite drastically. It's got about half the carbon output of another commercial tiny house construction. On the roof, I've used some recycled gutters, recycled ridge cap, and some second grade tin. I've used some second hand steel, and it's incredibly strong. All these pieces are intended to increase the lifetime of this house, therefore reducing the carbon output over time of the house. This is also incredibly towable. It's an important thing for me for tiny houses to be towable. I think that is the essence of their existence. This is only 1.8 tonnes, this house, which means I can tow it with a regular car. I don't need a gas guzzling enormous big truck to tow it. One of the reasons that it is very towable is the electric brake system, which is normally fitted to a car. My car does not have electric brakes fitted to it, so I fitted this box here to the trailer itself. This is elect brakes create a very clever box which controls the amount of brake output to the electric brakes from your phone or from a remote control. The phone app was incredibly easy to use. I'm happy to give these guys a plug. They did a great job of helping me out when I needed it, and their product is working really well. It wasn't overly difficult to install either. I did choose to put it inside the house, which made it a little bit more difficult. That was for fireproofing reasons. The overall design of the house is also integral to the towability of it. It's very simple, it's lightweight. By reducing any additional corners, overhangs, I've made it more fire resistant as well. This house does come with a big warning. The notion that you can tow a tiny house away from a fire is incredibly dangerous. I know in America there is evidence to suggest that tiny houses get burnt less in forest fires than regular houses. In Australia, we have another problem. The fire here is moving quickly, incredibly quickly. The fire that approached this town moved at up to 80 kilometers an hour in short bursts. And the thought that with the sun blocked out from the smoke, in a panic, that you could tow a full-size tiny house away from a fire, even if you had the vehicle and the time to do so, is incredibly dangerous. It's terrifying to think what might happen if someone got trapped on the road, causing an accident and even blocking other people in. So I'd have to stress the policy around this house is that you lock up and leave. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Tom Coop. Please check out the rest of my channel. I hope this was very much helpful for you.